History is often written by the victors, a grand tapestry woven with threads of conquest, empire, and monumental battles. But sometimes, hidden within the folds of these grand narratives, lie smaller, more personal stories. Stories so strange, so potent, they have the power to rewrite everything we thought we knew. This is one of those stories. The tale of Sultan Mehmed II, the conqueror of Constantinople, and the single most dangerous discovery he ever made. This is the story of the girl behind the iron door. Our story begins in the year 1453. The air over Constantinople is thick with smoke and the bitter tang of defeat. The once impenetrable Theodosian walls have been breached, and the 1,000-year-old Byzantine Empire has breathed its last. Ottoman soldiers, jubilant and ruthless, swarm through the city's labyrinthine streets. Palaces are ransacked, treasures are plundered, and the great city, the queen of cities, is brought to its knees. Inside the sprawling, opulent Blasharny Palace, the former heart of Byzantine power, the scene is one of chaos. Janissaries, the elite troops of the Sultan, move with practiced efficiency, securing every room, every corridor. They are a force of nature, an unstoppable tide of conquest. Yet, deep within the palace's foundations, in a forgotten subbasement where the air is stale and cold, this tide meets an immovable object, an iron door. It's not a grand door. It's squat, unadorned, and sealed shut by a thick, angry crust of rust that seems to have grown out of the very stone around it. There's no keyhole, no handle, just a solid slab of pitted, dark metal. The soldiers, flushed with victory, see it as a final, defiant challenge. They attack it with everything they have. Heavy sledgehammers clang against the iron, the sound echoing dully in the confined space, the sparks flying like angry fireflies. The door doesn't even dent. They use pry bars, trying to find purchase in the seams, but the metal is fused to the frame. Frustrated, they bring in a heavy wooden beam to use as a makeshift ram. The door groans, but holds firm. They even try fire, heaping burning torches against its base, but the iron simply blackens and cools, impassive and silent. Word of this stubborn obstacle quickly travels up through the palace, a ripple of curiosity in the ocean of conquest. It eventually reaches the ears of the man at the center of it all, the 21-year-old Sultan Mehmed II. Mehmed is not just a conqueror. He is a scholar, a man of immense intellect and insatiable curiosity. The fall of Constantinople is his life's ambition realized. But the news of an unbreakable door piques an entirely different kind of interest. He descends into the bowels of the palace, his entourage of guards and viziers trailing behind him, their torches casting long, dancing shadows on the damp stone walls. The air grows colder, heavier, with each step down. When he arrives, the soldiers fall silent, their sweaty faces illuminated by the flickering torchlight. Mehmed approaches the door, his gaze sweeping over the scorch marks and dents. He runs a gloved hand over the cold, rough surface. A slight smile plays on his lips. He is not angry at the defiance. He is intrigued. It's a puzzle, a final secret of the empire he has just conquered. Turning to his personal guard, his voice is calm, measured, yet carries an absolute authority that no one would dare question. Break it. This is no longer a simple task for rank-and-file soldiers. This is a royal command. A massive, iron-tipped battering ram is brought down, a true siege weapon meant for city gates, not cellar doors. It takes 20 of the strongest janissaries to wield it. They heave it back, their muscles straining, their grunts echoing in the chamber. With a great, coordinated roar, they drive it forward. The impact is deafening, a sound like the cracking of the world's bones. The stone archway shudders and dust rains from the ceiling. A hairline fracture appears on the door. Again Mehmed commands, his eyes fixed, unblinking. They pull the ram back and strike again and again. The sound is a brutal, percussive rhythm of destruction. The fracture spiders across the metal. With a final ear-splitting shriek of tortured iron, the lock mechanism, rusted solid for who knows how many centuries, shatters internally. The great iron door, a silent guardian for ages, groans open just enough for a man to slip through. A wave of cold, musty air, untouched for generations, billows out from the darkness within. It carries the scent of dust, stone, and something else. Something ancient and still. The soldiers recoil, but Mehmed stands his ground. He takes a torch from a guard and steps over the threshold, peering into the gloom. The room is small, circular, and stark. There are no furnishings, no treasure chests, no forgotten imperial regalia. The walls are bare, unadorned stone. It is a cell, an empty tomb. For a moment, the Sultan feels a pang of disappointment. All that effort for an empty room. But then, as his eyes adjust to the darkness, he sees it. Or rather, he sees her. In the center of the room, sitting on the cold stone floor, is a figure. A girl. She is wrapped in a simple, dusty cloak, her face obscured by shadows. She isn't cowering. She isn't weeping. She is perfectly still, a small, unmoving island in the sudden chaos of her discovery. The Sultan takes another step forward, the torchlight washing over her. She looks up. Her face is pale from lack of sun, smudged with dirt, but it possesses a striking, almost severe beauty. Her eyes, however, are what seize his attention. They are dark, ancient, and they hold no trace of fear. There is no pleading, no terror of the conqueror standing before her. There is only a cold, focused, and incandescent fury. A rage that seems far too old and far too vast for such a young face. Whispers erupt among the soldiers and viziers crowded at the doorway. They recognize the patterns on the tattered hem of her cloak, the subtle emblem of the two-headed eagle. "It's a Palaeologos," one murmurs. "A princess, she is Theodora Palaeologona, the youngest daughter of the last imperial line. A princess thought to have vanished years ago." Mehmed dismisses the whispers with a flick of his wrist. He studies the girl, this last defiant ember of the empire he has extinguished. He, the master of armies, the man who broke the unbreakable walls, now stands before a single, unarmed girl who looks at him not as a conqueror, but as an interruption. "Who are you?" he asks, his voice softer than before. Her reply is not a plea for mercy. It's a quiet, chilling statement. "You have made a grave mistake." Mehmed, the conqueror, the Caesar of Rome, feels a sensation he has not felt in a very long time. It is not fear, not yet. It is a deep, unsettling premonition. A sense that by breaking down this iron door, he has not just breached a forgotten cell, but has unleashed something far more dangerous. Something that was locked away for a very, very good reason. The story of Mehmed's conquest was supposed to have ended today. But as he looked into the furious eyes of the girl in the dark, he had the terrifying feeling that a new, and far more perilous chapter had just begun. Thank you for watching. If you were as captivated by this mystery as we are, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. You won't want to miss part 2, where we uncover why Princess Theodora was locked away and what secrets lie buried with her behind the iron door. See you next time. The soldiers didn't wait for a command. They saw the defiance in her eyes, the proud tilt of her chin, and they seized her arms, their grips like iron bands. They expected a struggle, a desperate fight from a woman cornered. A woman who had just watched her entire world crumble into dust and rubble. But she didn't fight. She didn't scream or weep or plead. Her body remained still, a statue of cold fury amidst the chaos of the conquered city. All her energy, all her focus was channeled into a single, piercing gaze. She looked past the rough hands holding her, past the jeering soldiers, and straight at the man responsible for it all. The man on the magnificent warhorse, his armor glinting in the smoky afternoon light. The conqueror, Sultan Mehmed. He was about to turn away, his victory complete, his mind already moving on to the next strategic step in building his empire. But her stare stopped him. It was a physical force, a spear thrown across the ruined courtyard. He met her eyes, expecting fear, expecting hatred. He found both, but they were forged into something else, something harder and more dangerous. Unbroken pride. The silence stretched, thick with tension. The soldiers holding her grew uneasy, shifting their weight. Mehmed's generals watched, their expressions unreadable. Then she spoke. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the noise of the aftermath like a blade. Every word was deliberate, each syllable a polished stone of contempt. You broke the door. Sultan, her voice was calm, almost conversational, yet it dripped with scorn. She gestured with a slight nod of her head toward the splintered remains of the once great palace gates, the symbol of her family's centuries-old rule, now reduced to kindling. But not the dynasty. The words hung in the air. A collective gasp went through the crowd of soldiers. This was not just defiance, it was a challenge. A declaration that even in utter defeat, something essential, something immortal, remained untouched. Mehmed froze. His hand, which had been resting on the pommel of his sword, tightened. For a long moment, his face was a mask of cold fury. The temperature in the courtyard seemed to drop. His commanders braced themselves, certain he would order her immediate execution. No one spoke to the conqueror of Constantinople like that. No one lived after doing so. Then the unexpected happened. A low rumble started in Mehmed's chest. It grew into a chuckle, then a full, resonant laugh. It wasn't a laugh of mirth or amusement. It was a low, dangerous sound, the sound of a predator admiring the spirit of its prey just before the final pounce. The laughter died as quickly as it began, and his eyes, dark and calculating, bored into hers once more. He leaned forward slightly in his saddle, his voice a menacing purr that carried only to her. "You," he said, drawing the word out, "are either very brave or very foolish." She didn't flinch. Her gaze remained locked on his, unwavering. She had prepared for this moment, rehearsed it in the final, terrifying hours as the city fell. She had imagined her own death 1,000 times. Fear was an old, familiar coat she had long since discarded. "I had nothing left to lose," she answered, her voice even quieter now, a statement of absolute fact. It was the truth. Her family, her home, her future, all of it, had been consumed by the flames of his ambition. All that remained was her name, her bloodline, and the indomitable will that flowed through it. She was an empty vessel, but one made of tempered steel. A slow, cruel smile spread across Mehmed's face. This was better than he could have hoped for. Fear was a blunt instrument, easy to use, but imprecise. Desperation, however. A person with nothing left to lose was a person free from all constraints. They could be molded, directed, weaponized. Her courage wasn't a liability, it was an asset. An asset he could exploit. He dismounted from his horse in one fluid motion, the armor plates of his uniform clinking softly. He strode toward her, the crowd of soldiers parting before him like water. He stopped just inches from her face, so close she could feel the warmth of his breath. The soldiers holding her tensed, but he waved a hand and they reluctantly released her arms. She didn't move. "Good," he whispered, the word a secret shared between them, a contract being signed in the ruins of her life. His voice was a silken threat, a promise of a fate far more complex than a simple death. "Then I can use you." He saw the flicker in her eyes, not of fear, but of understanding. She had thrown her challenge, and he had not only accepted it, but raised the stakes. This was no longer just about conqueror and conquered. It was a game now, a deadly chess match played on a board of empire. And intrigue, and she had just become his most unpredictable, and perhaps most valuable, peace. Her defiance hadn't saved her life. It had condemned her to a new kind of existence, one intertwined with the very man who had destroyed her world. And as he turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone in the wreckage, she knew her war was far from over. It had just begun. Thank you so much for watching. If you're captivated by this story and want to know what happens next, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss the next chapter. See you in the next video. Instead of being thrown into a cold, dark cell, I found myself being led down a long, echoing hallway. The torchlight flickered across ancient tapestries, their colors faded, their stories silenced by time. Mehmed walked ahead, his silhouette a looming shadow against the stone walls. He stopped before a pair of heavy, ornate doors and pushed them open. The air that rushed out was stale, thick with the dust of ages. He motioned for me to enter. This wasn't a dungeon. It was the old throne room. My breath caught in my throat. I hadn't been in this chamber since I was a child. It was where the emperors of old held court, a place of power and history that had been abandoned for a newer, more opulent hall decades ago. But its majesty, though faded, remained. High above, a magnificent golden double-headed eagle, the symbol of our empire, still gleamed. Its fierce gaze, a stark contrast to the cracked and broken marble floor beneath it. Dust motes danced like tiny ghosts in the shafts of moonlight that pierced through the high, arched windows. The room was a perfect metaphor for my city, glorious but broken. Mehmed didn't speak. He simply walked to the center of the room, to the dais where the throne sat. It was carved from dark wood and inlaid with ivory, its arms worn smooth by the hands of countless rulers. He gestured towards it. "Sit," he commanded, his voice echoing in the vast, empty space. The word was a slap, an insult. To order me, the daughter of emperors, to sit on the throne of my ancestors as his prisoner. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. I stared at him, my mind reeling. Was this some new form of torture? A psychological game designed to break my spirit? I shook my head, my voice barely a whisper. On my throne, the words were meant to be a defiant question, a reminder of who I was, of whose blood ran in my veins. But they came out sounding small, lost in the cavernous room. Mehmed's lips curled into a semblance of a smile, a chilling, humorless expression. "On your throne," he corrected, the emphasis deliberate, each word a carefully placed stone building the walls of my new reality. This was no longer my throne. It was his to give. Hesitantly, I moved forward. Each step felt heavy, as if my shoes were filled with lead. The fabric of my gown whispered against the broken marble, the only sound besides the distant cries of the conquered city. I ascended the few steps of the dais, my hand brushing against the cool, worn wood of the throne. It felt both familiar and alien. Taking a deep breath, I sat. My back was ramrod straight, a habit ingrained since childhood. I lifted my chin, refusing to show the fear that was coiling in my stomach like a serpent. If this was to be my final humiliation, I would face it with the dignity of my lineage. As soon as I was seated, Mehmed began to move. He circled me, his steps slow and measured, like a wolf circling its prey. Or perhaps, more accurately, like a strategist studying a map, plotting his next move. His eyes never left me, sharp and calculating. He took in every detail, from the defiant tilt of my head to the trembling I couldn't quite conceal in my hands. The silence stretched, thin and taut, until I thought I would scream. Finally, he spoke again, his voice low and conversational, as if we were discussing the weather. "You know your people," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. He continued his slow, predatory circle. "You know their weaknesses." He paused, letting the word hang in the air between us. "Their pride. Another pause. Their loyalties, my hands, hidden in the folds of my gown, clenched into tight fists. My nails dug into my palms, the small pain a welcome anchor in the swirling chaos of my thoughts. He was dissecting my people, laying them bare with his words, and I was forced to sit here and listen. He knew us. He had studied us, learned our strengths, and, more importantly, how to turn those strengths against us. Pride, which had fueled our empire for 1,000 years, had also blinded us to the threat gathering at our gates. I couldn't bear it any longer. My voice, when I spoke, was sharp, cutting through the heavy silence. "What do you want from me?" I demanded, my gaze locking with his as he completed his circle and stopped directly in front of the throne. He stood there, looking down at me, the conqueror before his prize. The moonlight from the high window caught the silver threads in his robes, making them shimmer. For a long moment, he just watched me, his expression unreadable. I felt like an insect under a lens, scrutinized and powerless. Then he leaned in closer, his face just inches from mine. His voice dropped, becoming a conspiratorial whisper, a sound more terrifying than any shout. "I want the Greeks to accept their new ruler," he said, simply. The audacity of it stole my breath. He didn't just want the city. He wanted the hearts and minds of its people. He wanted their submission, their acceptance of him as their legitimate sovereign. My people were proud, stubborn. They would never willingly bow to a foreign conqueror, no matter how complete his victory. They would resist. They would fight in the shadows. They would nurse their hatred for generations. He must have seen the disbelief, the scorn on my face, because his chilling smile returned. He reached out, his finger tracing the carved eagle on the arm of the throne right next to my hand. I flinched but held my ground. "And," he continued, his voice soft but laced with steel, "they will listen to you more than to any sword." And there it was, the purpose of this entire charade. He didn't want to break me. He wanted to use me. I was not just a prisoner. I was to be his tool, his puppet, his voice. The sword had taken the city walls, but he needed me to conquer the city's soul. I was to be the bridge between the old world and the new, the one to convince my people to lay down their pride and accept their chains. In that moment, sitting on the throne of my ancestors, I understood the true nature of my defeat. It was not just the fall of a city. It was the beginning of a whole new war, one I would have to fight from within the enemy's camp, and the first battle had just begun. Thank you for watching this chapter of our story. If you're captivated by Theodora's fate, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next part of this epic saga. Your support allows us to keep bringing these historical tales to life. See you in the next video. He made her the voice of the city, an impossible role, a bridge between two worlds that wanted nothing more than to see each other burn. She was to be the mediator, the negotiator, the single thread holding together the tattered remnants of a fallen empire and the iron will of its new masters. Theodora, once a princess of Byzantium, now a pawn in a game she never asked to play. For the Greeks, her people, she was a traitor, a collaborator, the woman who spoke with the conqueror's tongue. They saw her walking through the scarred streets of Constantinople, now Istanbul, and their eyes, once filled with admiration, were now cold with contempt. For the Ottomans, she was a viper, a clever Byzantine noble, beautiful and cunning, who had somehow enchanted their sultan. They watched her every move, their suspicion a heavy cloak she had to wear day and night. She was a ghost in her own city, haunted by the past and distrusted by the present. Every step she took was a walk on a razor's edge. The marketplace, once a place of vibrant life and familiar faces, was now a gauntlet of hatred. Whispers followed her like shadows, slithering through the crowds. There she is, the Sultan's pet. She dines with our enemies while our people starve. The words were like tiny, sharp stones pelting her from all sides. She learned to build walls around her heart, to keep her expression neutral, to show no weakness. Weakness was an invitation for attack. Oh, she had to be strong, not just for herself, but for the fragile peace she was trying to broker. She arranged for food distributions, negotiated for the reopening of churches, and argued for the protection of ancient libraries. Every small victory felt monumental, but it was never enough to wash away the stain of her association with the Sultan. One afternoon, as the sun cast long, weary shadows across the rubble-strewn square near the Hagia Sophia, it happened. The air was thick with the smell of dust and despair. Theodora was overseeing the delivery of grain, her presence a silent promise that the Sultan's word would be kept. A man, his face gaunt and his eyes burning with a feverish rage, broke from the crowd. He was clutching a handful of ash and soot scooped from the ruins of a burned-out home. He lunged forward, his voice a ragged scream that cut through the murmuring of the people. "Traitor!" he yelled, and with a vicious flick of his wrist, he threw the ash at her. It billowed in a black cloud, settling on her hair, her face, her fine clothes, a grim baptism of hatred. "Burn with the Empire!" he shrieked, his voice cracking with grief and fury. "Burn with the rest of us!" The crowd gasped. Some looked away, ashamed. Others stared, their faces hard and unforgiving. Theodora stood frozen, the gritty ash stinging her eyes, the man's words echoing in the sudden ringing silence. She was shaken to her core. It wasn't the physical act that hurt, but the raw, unfiltered hatred behind it. It was the voice of her own people, condemning her to the very flames she was trying to extinguish. In that moment, she felt the full weight of her isolation, a crushing burden that threatened to break her. Her guards started to move, their hands on their swords, but she raised a trembling hand to stop them. What good would more violence do? And then, from the shadows of a nearby archway, a figure emerged. It was Mehmed. He had been watching, as he often did, unseen, observing the city and its fragile new order. But this public humiliation of the woman he had placed at the center of his new world was something he would not tolerate. He strode forward, his every step radiating an authority that was absolute. The crowd, which had been a restless sea of resentment, fell utterly silent. They parted for him as if by an invisible force. The man who had thrown the ash began to tremble, the fire in his eyes replaced by stark terror. Mehmed didn't even look at him. His gaze was fixed on Theodora, his expression unreadable but intense. He reached her side and stood between her and the crowd, a human shield. He turned his head slowly, his eyes sweeping over the silent faces, each person feeling the weight of his personal attention. Then his voice, not loud but carrying to the farthest corner of the square, cut through the silence. It was calm, deliberate, and laced with deadly promise. "Harm her," he declared, his gaze locking onto the terrified man. "And you harm me?" The words hung in the air, simple, direct, and utterly unambiguous. An attack on Theodora was an attack on the Sultan himself. The crowd held its breath. The man who had thrown the ash fell to his knees, his face ashen. The message was clear. She was protected, untouchable. That single act, that public declaration, changed everything. Mehmed didn't say another word. He gently took Theodora by the arm, his touch a stark contrast to the violence of moments before, and led her away from the square, leaving the crowd to grapple with what they had just witnessed. And as night fell over the city, the whispers began again. But now they were different. They were no longer just filled with hatred, but with a burning curiosity and a new kind of fear. The rumor mill of Istanbul, always grinding, went into overdrive. Why? Why would the conqueror, the mighty Sultan, publicly defend a Greek princess, a captive? The questions spread like wildfire through the winding streets and shadowed alleyways. Why does he protect her? One would ask in a hushed tone over a cup of coffee. He could have any woman he wants. Why her? Other would murmur in the marketplace. What is she to him? The theories were endless. Some said she had bewitched him with Byzantine magic, a sorceress weaving spells in the heart of the palace. Others claimed she was a master strategist, feeding him information, her mind as valuable as any army. And then the most tantalizing question of all began to take shape, whispered in the most secret of conversations. Is she just a prisoner, or something more dangerous? The line between captive and confidant, between pawn and queen, had suddenly blurred. She was no longer just the voice of the city. She had become its greatest mystery. And in the dangerous dance of power between Theodora and Mehmed, the entire fate of the city and its people now hung in the balance. Thank you so much for watching. If you're captivated by Theodora's story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for the next chapter in this incredible historical saga. We've got so much more to uncover. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you won't miss it. See you in the next video. Weeks later, a summons arrived, different from any before. It wasn't to the grand divan or the bustling courtyards. It was a quiet call, a single guard leading her through corridors she had never seen, down staircases that spiraled into the heart of the palace. The air grew cooler, the torchlight casting long, dancing shadows on the stone walls. Finally, they stopped before a heavy wooden door. The guard knocked once, then opened it, gesturing for her to enter, before pulling it shut, leaving her in silence. The room was small, almost a cell, but furnished with an unexpected richness. Thick carpets muffled her footsteps, and intricate tapestries depicting ancient battles covered the walls. In the center, under the steady glow of an ornate oil lamp, stood a single large table. And on that table, a sight that made her breath catch in her throat. A meticulously detailed map of Constantinople. Every street, every wall, every cistern and church was laid out in exquisite ink. It was a masterpiece of cartography, a blueprint for conquest and control. And standing over it, his back to her, was Sultan Mehmed. He didn't turn as she entered. He just stood there, a solitary, powerful figure, his focus entirely on the sprawling city captured on parchment. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken tension. She waited, her heart a steady drum against her ribs. She had grown accustomed to his court, to the intricate dance of power and politics, but this felt different. This was raw, stripped of pretense. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and resonant, filling the small space. You've been in the city. You've walked its streets, listened to its people. You know its secrets. He still hadn't turned, his finger tracing a line along the Theodosian walls on the map. I've rebuilt much, but pockets of resistance remain. They fester in the shadows. These remnants of the old empire. They whisper of rebellion, of reclaiming what was lost. He paused, and then he turned to face her. His eyes, usually burning with ambition, were cold, calculating. Tell me where they are hiding. The command was simple, direct. An order from a sultan who is not used to being disobeyed. The air crackled with expectation. This was the test. Was she his advisor, or just another tool? Her mind raced. She could give him names, locations. She had heard the whispers in the marketplaces, seen the defiant glances in the eyes of the old Byzantine families. It would be easy to betray them, to secure her place at his side, to become indispensable. The path of survival was clear. But as she looked at him, at the map, at the chilling efficiency of his plan, she saw not a city being reborn, but a city being shackled. The new walls, the new markets, the new mosques, they were being built on a foundation of fear, not hope. The people weren't being integrated, they were being subjugated. The whispers of rebellion weren't just the last gasps of a fallen empire. They were the first cries of a new oppression. And she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that she could not be a part of it. She took a deep breath, meeting his intense gaze without flinching. No, the word was quiet, but but it landed in the silent room with the force of a thunderclap. It was a sound Mehmed had likely not heard in years, especially not from someone who owed him their life and position. He didn't react at first, simply staring at her as if he hadn't processed the word. A slight furrow appeared between his brows. He tilted his head. "No?" he repeated, the single word dripping with disbelief, a dangerous edge creeping into his tone. It was a question, but it was also a warning. This was the precipice, Kea, the point of no return. She could still take it back, beg his forgiveness, offer up the rebels as a penance. But the image of the city, vibrant and defiant even in its defeat, flashed in her mind. The faces of the people, proud and resilient. She couldn't sacrifice them for her own safety. "You're not rebuilding the city," she said, her voice gaining strength, conviction ringing in every syllable. "You're caging it. You're building with fear and steel, and a city built on fear will never be strong. It will only be brittle. You will break it all over again." A muscle in the Sultan's jaw tightened. His eyes narrowed, the cold calculation turning into a simmering fire. He was a conqueror, a man who had shattered the walls of the world's greatest city. He was not a man who was accustomed to lectures on governance from anyone, let alone her. The silence returned, heavier this time, charged with his barely contained fury. He was judging her, weighing her, his mind, as sharp as a scimitar, deciding her fate. She could see the internal struggle, the clash between his ingrained authority and the unexpected challenge she presented. In that heart-stopping moment, she did something that defied all logic, all instinct for self-preservation. It was an act of pure, unadulterated impulse, born from a desperate need to make him understand. She reached forward, her hand moving with a speed that surprised even herself. Her fingers brushed against the edge of the parchment, the map that represented his entire strategy, his vision of control. She didn't just point to it. She grabbed it. And then, before he could even react, she moved it towards the flickering flame of the oil lamp. For a split second, nothing happened. Then, the corner of the map caught. A tiny tongue of orange flame appeared, licking at the dry parchment. It hesitated, then greedily began to crawl across the ink, devouring the streets and buildings of Constantinople. The fire spread with alarming speed, a creeping line of destruction across his perfect plan. The room was filled with the hiss and crackle of burning paper. The flames lit her face, casting a defiant, almost feral glow in her eyes. She held the burning map aloft, a burning offering, a burning ultimatum. "Burn the old plan," she said, her voice steady and clear above the sound of the fire. "Burn the strategy of fear and suppression, or you will burn the city for real, with rebellion and hatred. The choice is yours." She held his gaze, unblinking, as the map of his conquest turned to black, curling ash in her hand. Mehmed stared at her, his anger momentarily forgotten, replaced by sheer, unadulterated shock. He wasn't looking at an advisor or a subject. He was looking at a force of nature, a weapon he had never conceived of. She hadn't just disobeyed him. She had symbolically destroyed his authority right in front of his eyes. She had challenged the very foundation of his power with nothing but a word and a flame. He had faced armies, cannons, and emperors. He had never faced this. The last piece of the map turned to ash and fluttered to the floor. The only light was the lamp, the only sound their breathing. He continued to stare, his expression unreadable. She braced herself for the explosion, for the call of the guards, for the cold finality of the executioner's blade. This was the end. And then the most unexpected thing in the world happened. The corner of his mouth twitched. The hard line of his lips softened. A low chuckle escaped him, then another. And then Sultan Mehmed, the conqueror of worlds, the shadow of God on earth, looked at the woman who had just burned his plans to ash, and he smiled. A true, genuine, and utterly astonishing smile. The next morning, Mehmed convened his court. The air was thick with anticipation. Generals, viziers, and imams stood in their finest silks and velvets, their faces a mixture of pride and exhaustion. They had conquered the unconquerable. They had brought the queen of cities to its knees. Now, they waited for their sultan to chart the future of their new capital. Mehmed stood before them, his presence commanding the vast hall into silence. He let the quiet stretch, his dark eyes sweeping over the assembly, before he spoke. His voice, clear and unwavering, cut through the tension. Princess Theodora will help design the new Constantinople. For a moment, there was only stunned silence. Then, the room erupted. It wasn't just murmuring, it was a roar of disbelief and fury. A tidal wave of rage crashed against the Sultan's throne. Whispers turned to shouts. A Christian girl. One general spat, his hand instinctively going to the hilt of his sword. A Byzantine. Another exclaimed, his face contorted in disgust. He saw her not as a person, but as the embodiment of the enemy they had just vanquished. A high-ranking cleric, his voice trembling with indignation, stepped forward. "She is a threat to your rule, your majesty, a viper you are welcoming into your own nest." The court was a sea of angry faces, their loyalty to Mehmed clashing violently with their deep-seated hatred for the Byzantines. They saw this as an insult to their victory, a stain on their honor. They had shed blood for this city, and now their sultan was elevating one of the defeated to a position of power. It felt like a betrayal, but Mehmed was unmoved. He stood like a rock against the storm of their anger, his expression unreadable. He had anticipated this reaction. He had known his decision would be wildly unpopular, that it would be seen as madness. But Mehmed didn't care about their fury. He cared about results. He wasn't building a city for yesterday's hatreds. He was building an empire for tomorrow's glories. He let their rage wash over him, and when it began to subside, exhausted by its own ferocity, he raised a hand. The hall fell silent once more, the air still crackling with resentment. He didn't just dismiss their concerns. He crushed them under the weight of his absolute authority. He laid out the terms of his agreement with Theodora, each point a fresh shock to the assembled court. First, he declared, "She will have a seat at my council." Gasps rippled through the room. A woman, a Christian, in the highest echelons of Ottoman power. It was unthinkable. This was a privilege reserved for the most trusted viziers and wisest military commanders. To give it to her was to give her a voice in the very heart of the empire. Then came the second decree. "She will have my personal protection from all harm." This was not just a guarantee of safety. It was a clear and public warning. Anyone who dared to threaten or disrespect Theodora would be threatening the Sultan himself. He was drawing a line in the sand, placing her under the shield of his own power. The message was unmistakable. Her life was as valuable to him as any of his top generals. He continued, his voice hammering home the reality of this new order. "She will have complete authority over the rebuilding of the Greek districts." This was a masterstroke of political genius. Though his court couldn't see it yet, the Greek population of the city was terrified, leaderless, and resentful. By putting one of their own in charge of their restoration, Mehmed was not just rebuilding homes, he was rebuilding trust. He was offering an olive branch, demonstrating that he could be a ruler, not just a conqueror. But to the men in the room, it felt like he was giving away a piece of their prize. Finally, the most shocking provision of all. She will have the freedom to walk the city without escort. In a society where high-ranking women, especially those in the Sultan's circle, were kept in seclusion, this was scandalous. It granted Theodora a level of personal freedom that was unheard of, even for Ottoman royalty. It signified a unique status, placing her outside the normal constraints of their world. She would not be a captive or a concubine. She would be a public figure, a symbol of a new, integrated Constantinople. With these 4 decrees, Mehmed had done more than just empower a princess. He had shattered centuries of tradition. It fundamentally altered the power dynamics of his own court. Theodora wasn't just a consultant or an advisor. She was now, in effect, a minister of his government with her own portfolio and the Sultan's direct backing. The court was left reeling, their minds struggling to process the scale of this change. In that one morning, Theodora had been transformed. She was no longer just a survivor, a relic of a fallen empire. She became something far more potent. She became the only person in the entire Ottoman Empire who could look the Sultan in the eye and say no and live to see the next day. Her no was not an act of defiance, but a tool of immense value. While his viziers and generals would tell him what he wanted to hear, afraid to bring him bad news or challenge his ideas, Theodora was different. Her perspective was untainted by the fear and ambition that clouded the judgment of others. She could offer him the one thing a man with absolute power desperately needs but rarely gets: the unvarnished truth. This unique position made her incredibly valuable to Mehmed's grand vision. He knew that to build a truly global multicultural empire, he needed more than just swords and cannons. He needed bridges. He needed understanding. Theodora was his bridge to the Christian world, his key to unlocking the vast intellectual and economic potential of his new Greek subjects. She could help him pacify a resentful population, restart trade, and attract the artisans and scholars needed to make Constantinople the center of the world once more. But this same power that made her so valuable also made her incredibly dangerous. To the old guard, the viziers and pashas who had built their careers on war and conquest, she was a profound threat. She represented a new way of thinking, a shift from destruction to construction, from division to integration. Her influence with the Sultan undermined their own. Her access to his ear was a privilege they coveted and resented. They watched her every move, their smiles like daggers, waiting for her to make a mistake. They saw her not as an asset, but as a rival, an obstacle to their own ambition. And she was dangerous to Mehmed himself, though he might not have fully realized it at the time. By giving her such power, by making her so indispensable, he had made himself vulnerable. His legacy, his vision for Constantinople, was now tied to her. If she failed, or worse, if she betrayed him, the backlash would be immense. His enemies within the court would use it as proof of his folly, a weapon to turn the army and the clergy against him. He was staking a part of his future on the loyalty and competence of a woman he barely knew, a woman who had every reason to hate him. It was the greatest gamble of his life. Theodora walked out of the court that day, a different person. She walked into a city that was both her home and her cage, a landscape of ruins and opportunity. She carried the weight of her people's survival on her shoulders and the Sultan's audacious trust in her hands. She was the ghost of Byzantium and the architect of a new world, a Christian princess at the heart of a Muslim empire. The game had changed. The stakes were higher than ever, and she was now one of its most important players. The city's future, and her own, was an unwritten page, and she was the one holding the pen. Thank you so much for watching. This part of the story is just so fascinating, showing the political genius of Mehmed and the incredible courage of Theodora. If you're enjoying this deep dive into history, please hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter in this incredible saga. We'll see you in the next video. They say history is written by the victors. But what happens when there are no victors? Only survivors. After the Great Upheaval, when empires crumbled and dust settled on the ruins of ambition, two figures emerged from the chaos. On one side, Elias, the pragmatist, a man who saw the world in numbers and logistics, in stone and steel. He believed order was the only medicine for a world bleeding from 1,000 wounds. On the other, Lyra, the idealist, a voice for the forgotten, who saw the world in stories and songs, in hearts and hopes. She believed compassion was the seed from which a new world must grow. They were enemies, bound by the shared tragedy of a shattered continent. They were the architects of a fragile peace, a peace they both despised for its compromises. And this is the story of the bond they forged, a bond that would reshape the world, a bond no one dared speak about. Their first official meeting was in the shell of the old imperial Senate. The domed ceiling, once gilded and magnificent, was now a gaping wound open to the sky. Rainwater pooled on the marble floor, reflecting the gray, unforgiving clouds. Elias arrived with maps and ledgers, his face a mask of cold calculation. He saw the chamber as a problem of engineering: how to repair the roof, drain the water, rebuild the walls. Lyra arrived with nothing but the weight of 1,000,000 silent screams on her shoulders. She saw the chamber as a tomb, a memorial to a failed age. She wanted to tear it down, plant a forest in its place, a living testament to the death of hubris. Their argument that day became a legend whispered in the taverns and marketplaces. Elias spoke of supply chains, of grain distribution to prevent famine, of quarrying stone for fortifications to prevent another invasion. Every word was a brick, meant to build a fortress against the encroaching darkness. Lyra spoke of the people, of the children who had forgotten the taste of fruit, of the elders who died without their stories being heard. Every word was a seed, meant to cultivate a garden in the wasteland. He called her a sentimental fool, chasing dreams while the world starved. She called him a heartless machine, building a pristine cage for broken souls. They didn't agree on a single thing. The meeting ended with a slammed fist on a stone table and a vow to never yield. The foundation of their new world was laid not with mortar, but with mutual contempt. Yet they were forced to meet again, and again. The problems were too vast for one vision to solve. Famine was not just a logistical problem. It was a crisis of despair. Security was not just about walls, it was about giving people something worth defending. They spent long nights in drafty tents and ruined castles, arguing over laws, roads, churches, and schools. The flickering candlelight cast long, dancing shadows on the walls, making them look like titans wrestling for the soul of the future. Some nights they shouted, their voices echoing through the empty halls, each trying to drown out the other's logic with the sheer force of their conviction. Elias would map out a new trade route, a straight, efficient line across the scarred landscape. Lyra would point to the villages it bypassed, the ancient groves it would destroy, the communities it would sever. She would argue for a winding path, one that followed the contours of the land and its people, even if it took twice as long. He would tear at his hair in frustration, accusing her of sacrificing progress for poetry. Other nights, their arguments would soften into whispers. Surrounded by reports of plague, of border skirmishes, of whispers of rebellion, the sheer weight of their responsibility would press down on them. The anger would drain away, replaced by a shared, bone-deep exhaustion. In these quiet moments, they would talk about their pasts. Elias spoke of his father, a master mason who taught him that a foundation must be perfect, or the entire structure will collapse. He saw the world as a building, and he was terrified of a single crack. Lyra spoke of her grandmother, a storyteller who taught her that a people without their stories are just dust in the wind. She saw the world as a tapestry, and she was terrified of a single thread being lost. They saw the ghosts that haunted each other, the fears that drove their stubbornness. They didn't offer comfort. They didn't offer pity. They simply listened to sentinels sharing a long, lonely watch. And some nights, the most difficult nights, they sat in silence. Words were useless. The maps were just paper. The reports were just ink. They would sit across from each other, staring at the same broken world reflected in each other's eyes. It was in these silences that the real change happened. In the absence of argument, they began to see the pieces of truth in the other's position. Elias, staring at a report of rising suicides in a well-fed but desolate city, finally understood that bread alone could not sustain a human spirit. He saw the hollowness behind his perfect efficiency. Lyra, after visiting a border town decimated by a bandit raid, finally understood that hope alone could not stop a sword. She saw the vulnerability in her beautiful ideals. It was not love. There was no softness, no affection. The very idea would have made them both laugh, a harsh, bitter sound. It was not hatred either. The fire of their initial animosity had burned down, leaving behind something harder, more resilient. It was something sharper, stronger, more destructive to their old selves. It was respect. A grudging, difficult, and absolute respect, forged in the fire of their shared crucible. Elias began to add festivals and arts funding to his budgets, his calculations now factoring in the unquantifiable variable of human joy. Lyra began to organize militias and grain silos, her stories now including heroes who were engineers and quartermasters. They didn't become friends, they became something more vital. They became two halves of a functioning whole, and the empire felt it. The nascent, fragile thing they were building. The roads that were built were not only efficient, but they curved around sacred hills. The new laws were not only just, but they were practical and enforceable. The schools taught both mathematics and poetry. The new sigil of the realm, designed by a committee they both chaired after a month of brutal debate, was a tree with roots of steel. The people on the ground didn't understand the strange alliance at the top. They saw the results. They saw a world that was slowly, painstakingly, beginning to heal. They saw the pragmatism of Elias tempered by the compassion of Lyra. They saw the idealism of Lyra given structure and strength by the realism of Elias. Their bond was a secret they kept even from themselves. To acknowledge it would be to admit weakness, to admit that their own worldview was incomplete. It was a dangerous admission, one that their political enemies would have used to tear them apart. So they maintained the facade of opposition. In public, they were still the Iron Lord and the people's muse, locked in an eternal struggle. Their supporters cheered for their respective sides, fueling a rivalry that, at the highest level, no longer truly existed. It was a necessary theater, a political dance that allowed them to continue their work without being accused of betraying their principles. They were playing a long game, and they were the only two players who knew all the rules. There was a moment, a single, fleeting moment, when the mask slipped. They stood on the ramparts of the newly rebuilt capital, looking out over a city that was alive again. The sounds of construction, of markets, of children laughing rose up to meet them. For a year, they had fought over every stone, every street, every law in this city. Now it stood before them, a testament to their war. Elias turned to Lyra, the setting sun catching the gray in his hair. He didn't speak. He simply gave a short, sharp nod. It was a gesture that said everything. It said, "You were right." It said, "This is better than what I would have built alone." Lyra, her face usually a canvas of passionate expression, was completely still. She nodded back, a mirror image of his gesture. Her nod said, "This would not exist without your strength. You were right too." In that silent exchange, the unspoken treaty was signed. The bond was sealed. It was the only victory they ever acknowledged, and they did so without a single word. From that day on, the arguments didn't cease, but their character changed. They were no longer battles to be won, but problems to be solved. They were a team, the most unlikely, dysfunctional, and effective team the world had ever seen. They were the two pillars holding up a new world. Forever separate, forever bound, their strength found in the distance between them. Thanks for watching. If you were captivated by this story, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter in our saga. Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today, we're diving into one of history's most tantalizing mysteries, a secret whispered through the halls of Topkapi Palace for centuries. It's a story about a powerful sultan, a defiant princess, and a single, cryptic line in a private journal that has puzzled historians for generations. We're talking about Sultan Mehmed II, the man who conquered Constantinople, and the secret he took to his grave. So, let's set the scene. It's the late 15th century. Sultan Mehmed II, known as Mehmed the Conqueror, is one of the most powerful rulers in the world. He's a military genius, a patron of the arts, a complex and often ruthless leader who has expanded the Ottoman Empire to its zenith. His life is a whirlwind of battles, political intrigue, and grand architectural projects. He is a man who seemingly has everything. When he wasn't on the battlefield, he was a scholar, fluent in multiple languages and deeply interested in history, science, and philosophy. He was, by all accounts, a man of immense intellect and insatiable curiosity. Years go by, Mehmed's reign is marked by incredible successes and the consolidation of his vast empire. He transforms Constantinople from a decaying Byzantine capital into the glittering heart of the Ottoman world, renaming it Istanbul. He builds magnificent mosques, palaces, and markets. He is the absolute authority, the shadow of God on earth. His word is law, and his power is unmatched. But even the most powerful men have their secrets. Then, in 1481, Mehmed the Conqueror dies. The empire mourns, and the world holds its breath to see who will succeed him. As officials sort through his personal effects in the heavily guarded Topkapi Palace, they uncover his private journal. This is an incredible find, a direct window into the mind of one of history's most formidable figures. They expect to find state secrets, military strategies, and political calculations, and for the most part, that's exactly what they find. Page after page is filled with notes on governance, troop movements, tax policies, and diplomatic correspondence. It's a detailed chronicle of an empire being built, brick by brick, decision by decision. The journal is a historian's dream, a treasure trove of information. But as one of his closest viziers thumbs through the worn leather-bound book, his eyes catch something unusual. Tucked away on a seemingly random page, in the margin is a single line of script, written in Mehmed's own hand. It's different from the political notes surrounding it. It's personal, almost poetic, and utterly out of place. The line reads, "The iron door was not the treasure. The girl behind it was," just imagine the scene. The hushed silence of the Sultan's private chambers. The air thick with the smell of old paper and incense. And this one sentence, hanging in the air, pregnant with meaning. What iron door? What treasure? And most importantly, who was the girl? The viziers and courtiers are stumped. There are no other references to this in the entire journal. No context, no explanation. It's a complete mystery. This single enigmatic sentence is the only clue to a story that Mehmed apparently never told anyone. This is where history ends and speculation begins. Who was this girl? The line implies she was more valuable than any treasure, a statement of profound significance coming from a man who had conquered cities filled with gold, jewels, and priceless artifacts. This wasn't just a casual remark, it was a deeply personal reflection. Was she a captive? A princess from a conquered land? A secret love? The reference to an iron door suggests a place of confinement, a prison, a fortress, or perhaps a heavily guarded chamber within the palace itself. Let's explore some of the theories that have sprung up over the centuries. One popular theory revolves around the fall of Constantinople in 1453, when the city fell. Thousands were taken captive. Among them were nobles, scholars, and royalty. Mehmed was known to have taken a keen interest in the Byzantine imperial family and the city's elite. Could the girl behind the iron door have been a Byzantine princess captured during the siege? Perhaps she was held in a secure location, maybe one of the city's old towers, which could be described as having an iron door. The story goes that this princess was not like the others. While many pleaded for their lives or offered riches for their freedom, she was defiant. She refused to bow to the conqueror. Her spirit, her intelligence, her unbroken will in the face of utter defeat, perhaps that is what captivated Mehmed. He was a man accustomed to conquest, two people submitting to his power. To encounter someone who defied him, not with weapons, but with sheer strength of character, would have been a novel and perhaps intoxicating experience. He, the conqueror of empires, was himself conquered by the spirit of a single captive girl. In this version of the story, the treasure isn't a literal one. The line, "the iron door was not the treasure," could mean that he initially thought breaking through the defenses of her city or her family was the prize. But upon meeting her, he realized the real prize wasn't the conquest itself, but the person he found on the other side, the girl behind the door. Another theory suggests she wasn't Byzantine at all, but from another one of his many campaigns. Mehmed fought wars across the Balkans and Anatolia. He clashed with the Kingdom of Hungary, the Republic of Venice, and the rulers of Wallachia, like Vlad the Impaler. The Iron Door could refer to a captured castle in Serbia, Albania, or Greece. Perhaps he took a princess hostage to ensure a treaty was honored, a common practice at the time. He might have intended to use her as a political pawn, but over time he grew to admire her, even love her. Her confinement, symbolized by the Iron Door, became the setting for an unexpected and secret relationship. The phrase "lived to change the empire that destroyed her own" is a fascinating part of this legend. It suggests her influence went beyond a mere personal affection. How could a captive princess change the Ottoman Empire? Perhaps she influenced Mehmed's thinking. Known for his interest in different cultures, maybe she became his secret confidant, offering him a different perspective on the world. Maybe she introduced him to new ideas in art, philosophy, or even governance. Through her intelligence and counsel, she might have subtly shaped his policies, making his rule, in some small way, a fusion of the culture he had conquered and his own. This would have been a dangerous game. The Ottoman court was a nest of vipers, full of political rivalries and strict protocols. Any perceived influence from a foreign Christian captive would have been met with intense jealousy and suspicion from his viziers, his generals, and even the women of his own harem. So, their connection would have had to remain a closely guarded secret. The Iron Door wasn't just physical. It was a metaphor for the secrecy that surrounded her very existence. Think about the psychology of Mehmed. He was a man who had everything, but was also incredibly isolated by his own power. Who could he truly talk to? Who would dare to tell him the unvarnished truth? A defiant, intelligent princess who had already lost everything and had nothing left to fear might have been the only person in the world who could speak to him as an equal. In her, he might have found not just a lover, but a true intellectual partner, a mind that could challenge his own. That would be a treasure far greater than any gold or land. The legend of the princess behind the Iron Door became a fixture in the folklore of Istanbul. Storytellers would whisper tales of the ghost of a Byzantine princess haunting the old towers along the city walls, forever waiting, or of a mysterious woman in the Topkapi harem who held the sultan's heart, but whose name was never recorded in the official chronicles. The story resonated because it humanized the fearsome conqueror. It showed a side of him that was hidden from the world, a man capable of profound admiration and perhaps even love for someone who should have been his enemy. But ultimately, we must return to the fact that we don't know. No one ever learned what Mehmed truly meant by that line. There are no other records, no letters, no court documents that shed any light on this mystery. Was it a real person, or was it a metaphor for something else entirely? Could the girl have been a symbol for a piece of knowledge he discovered, a philosophical truth he uncovered that was hidden behind a door of ignorance? Given his scholarly nature, it's not impossible. But the romance of the story is too powerful to ignore. The image of the all-powerful sultan secretly cherishing the memory of a captive princess is a story for the ages. It's a reminder that even the grandest figures in history have their own private worlds, their own secret sorrows and joys that are lost to time. Mehmed took the full story to his grave, leaving behind just one breadcrumb, one tantalizing clue for us to ponder. The city of Istanbul, the very city he conquered, remembered the legend. It became part of its identity, a story whispered on the winds blowing from the Bosphorus, the princess behind the Iron Door. the only one who defied the conqueror and, in her own way, may have triumphed. She lived on, not in the pages of official history, but in the margin of a sultan's journal, and in the heart of the empire she changed from within. What do you guys think? Who was this mysterious girl? Was she a real princess, or is the explanation something else entirely? Let me know your theories down in the comments below. I'd love to read what you all come up with. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this dive into a historical mystery, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories from the past. See you next time.